If you have ever gotten the chance to listen to Tell Well the podcast, you already know the format: 2 people, 2 microphones, 1 real conversation, not a lot of polish, but just whatever shows up is what it's going to be. And really, this is what happens when you put 2 people in a room who just really care about this work. And so we are going to do that right here and right now with all of you watching. The chairs are set. Scott, the mic's getting hot. I'd love for you to welcome our next guest to Tell Well the podcast, Scott Holdman. Okay. All right, great. Well, and this is what happens with a live podcast. Okay, here we go. Over the rainbow. Welcome back to Tell Well the podcast. I'm Kringen, and today we have a very special guest coming to you live from the WellTold Conference in Fargo, North Dakota. The live audience can hear you. My guest today is someone who, if you've worked in nonprofit fundraising in this region for any length of time whatsoever, you already know the name. Scott Holdman has spent more than 2 decades helping nonprofits and givers close the gap between good intentions and real impact. He's coached and trained hundreds of organizations, many of whom are in the room across the Upper Midwest. He's the founder of Legacy Logic, where he works as what some folks have called a philanthropic butler, which I'm intrigued to learn more about. A trusted partner who walks alongside givers and the organizations they care about. Around here, Scott is what we call fundraising royalty. He's pretty quiet about him, which is also the most Scott thing about him. And we love him so much. Today we're going to talk about why listening is as powerful as speaking, and just talk a little bit about what we've heard so far. So I did a lot of intro for you, but Scott, for anybody in the room who doesn't know, who is Scott Holdman? Who the heck is Scott?
Well, something I think I did to help you out is actually wear the same outfit. I know that you on audio can't tell, but I did think about it, and I was like, that will help. It is me if we want to have a conversation later. Same guy on the profile picture. I have the outfit to match. You said listening is as important as speaking. And so one thing I would like to start us out with is that there's one of the 2 great Carls. There's Carl Jung and Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers has basically pioneered a whole method of therapy that has to do just with listening. And the ability to slow down and just really listen to somebody else is an entire gift, not just for them, but for you. And there's healing. I spent a whole career trying to be creative. And when I first learned the ability and a skill, which has to be developed like anything else, I would start to listen and then realize that people didn't need my ideas, which at first was kind of disheartening. I was like, I got a lot of great ideas. 10 of them. Do you want to? But by the time they've done, the answers they're already in all of you. Artemis, anybody watch this, right? All of us, collective sort of moment. I think a little bit more in depth than all of us watching Dog the Bounty Hunter or whatever moments on Netflix we're all watching together. Tiger King, maybe, better reference.
Memories.
And we all are in that moment in time where we just watched somebody cross the other side of the moon. If you've heard any of these sort of interviews, the astronauts are like, wow, really experienced something beyond myself. Well, if you look at the person next to you, they're as mysterious and amazing and as wonderful as a planet. And we don't walk around like that enough. And I think that's core to fundraising and anything you're trying to accomplish here, is that we forget how amazing each other are. And then I know it's hard for all of you do-gooders that care about other people, is if you believe that about the person sitting next to you, you have to at least try just a sliver to start to believe that about yourself. And so that's why I think listening is as important as speaking.
Ooh, I feel like one thing I have to share with folks, this guy has been very hard to get on stage. We had to do a lot of zhuzhing to get this guy back on stage, but I think what you just shared is exactly why people love hearing from you. It's very simple. As we talk about Tell Well all the time, story listening is as important as the telling portion of it. And so I'm curious, from what we've heard today, what are maybe the trends that we're seeing that maybe we need to be like listening harder for? What are some of the things that you're hearing out in the space?
Well, one thing, just to know, a great job, the previous speaker, for those that are here and get to watch that. And if you're listening to this later, go back and watch it. When you're younger, something you said really stuck with me is about removing things. When you're younger, you're like a painter. So it's just, I'm going to do everything. And as you age, sometimes it takes us longer than it should to realize that we really should be more like sculptors, where we're removing things and then something of beauty is revealed through that process. And there's discernment to sort of do both. And so one thing that certainly seems to be a trend is that we're starting to pick up this collective wisdom that maybe we can't do everything, because now our options have exacerbated our ability and capacity to do them, that we could do anything, but we can't do everything. And now we have to learn how to do prioritization. And what Noah shared is really important, because that is where tension comes in relationships a lot of times. Is this person doing good things, or if everybody has a laundry list, just ask them. Usually the tension is that we're not aligned on what should be at the top of that list, and other things get dropped off. And so if you start to really appreciate the encounters that you have with other people, that's a perfect opportunity to explore the planet, if you will, is to ask what's on the top of their list. And then we can work it out together. And so I think this is an incredibly important thing for us to pay attention to. The second, which is akin to that, is the lack of appreciation for the fundamentals. One of the things to ask yourself and to ask each other is, what is the fundamentals of your role? If you're not like I'm a sports person, I'm a skateboarder. I feel like I'm lying if I say a sports metaphor and don't disclose that I'm not very. It's a creative skateboarder. Gives you an idea of the vibe. But from what I understand, even skateboarding, which I'm more familiar with, is that you have to just know the fundamentals, the basics, if you will. But it's a little different than basics. Fundamentals are things that you work at consistently that help to provide and yield results over time. You can't do your job without doing the fundamentals of them, and that's your priority. So if we look at a bigger question, which sounds esoteric, but it really isn't, is what are the fundamentals of life? Because I would submit to you that it's like, if all of you, let's make a short list. If you got plenty of sleep last night, if you drank enough water today, right? If you were kind to yourself and just reduced a little bit of stress, had a tinge more gratitude about even the challenges in your life, that everything would be better. Add a moderate amount of exercise, and your life has just improved tenfold. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, have you got one of those weighted vests for rucking yet? And have you drank this giant water bottle which gives a timer on it? We're distracted, and we're dopamine fiends, just like our feed on our phone, which is revealing to us that this is actually a pattern of behavior, is that we're just, give me more and give me different and solve it today. And it's, well, what if the beautiful parts are actually in slowing down and being really good at the core skills? But it's hard to even define those in this day and age, and I think that's something that we're all emerging to. And a quick note on that is there's a difference between change and evolution, and I think that's a choice. A change is something we're just doing to do something differently. Evolution is a great word because we're on our way to something different. And why wouldn't we believe that we're not heading towards something different, even if it looks completely different than what we're currently doing, saying, or who we're with?
Wow. I always love my conversations with Scott because I always feel so much smarter when I leave them and more grounded. And it's almost like we did the breathing exercise that we did with Dana in real time as we're just listening to you share these things, these key, simple things about slowing down, not necessarily doing more. But what did you say about the sculpting? Pull apart,
removing
instead
rather
of
than
adding
painter,
more to.
you're a sculptor.
I love it. Scott, what are you seeing in the space that you're excited about? And then for shared expectations, we're going to open it up to a couple of questions on the floor. So if you're really excited and you have a question for Scott, have a question for me, we're going to open it up. But I'm curious, what in the space are you seeing, are you excited about?
Yeah, well, if you look at the agenda of the topics being shared here, there's so many things to be excited about. I mean, the ability to share stories, not just to tell somebody a narrative, but to make a greater sense of belonging. The idea that, we're going to diversify revenue, we're going to focus on priorities, we're going to lift each other up. There are so many things that I think are really exciting to see. And part of it is what a beautiful mix of people we have here too. And a lot of you millennials, hello fellow millennials, it's great that we're all aging. It's really wonderful to see. Somebody should do something about that. Oh, wait, I'm now old. I got to show up at the meeting, right? We're growing into these roles. And I think there's excitement in that. Also, this isn't necessarily a trend, this isn't a data, but something to pay attention to is that we really have started to understand how relational we all are. And that's an evolution. We're being reminded that we really need each other and that we need each other here. And that beautiful things happen when there's an exchange between two people. If one planet is special, imagine what happens if two of them get together. Then there's a whole nother universe around you. And so I think it's really exciting to see. And also the mixture of young and old seems to be more embracive than ever, where it actually feels comfortable to have multi-generational, different people in a room. It's welcoming. And this is something we haven't done. One of the things that we're good at is we can build frameworks, but something even with the Seasons of Story framework is not to overlook is what happens in between those categories. And generally speaking, you really don't know what you're experiencing until after. And imagine if somebody came before you that was older and could tell you what you're going through, how much money that would be worth in monetary terms. And a lot of that naming has to do with transitions, because as a culture, we're unhealthy. The psychologist Bill Plotkin says that a big part of this is because in our nation, we've lost the role of an elder. A role of an elder is to go in front and to be a guide and to tell you. Also, historically in tribes, they would give you your name. Your name, it's not just bad things, it's you should be called brightness, because everywhere you go, we all get lighter. They would bestow upon you sort of this path to move forward on and give you a naming. And so that's what happens when we go through these categories. I like to think of it this way, not as if we haven't gotten esoteric enough, but esoteric warning is we really try to control things that we have no business controlling. It's futile. So we like to think I can set up my life and we're going to execute that and it's going to look exactly like the bullet points on the slide. And it's not. Imagine yourself in a boat, and we like to use this metaphor for life, right? But the thing about the boat is that it's not stopping, it's already going. And so it's more like you have to accept that you're going down, sometimes rapids, and the decisions that you make help to determine the other rapids that open up. And so one of the things that we forget to do, both because we're not engaging with people to help us to name them, but we're also forgetting to look backwards to see where we've come from and how much we've done and how that should integrate into this moment right now. And so these movements in between things, like young and old, and understanding that the decisions that you make in between these categories is some of the richest things in life, isn't the destination, right? It's our way working in between things. When you hear somebody get an award, you can think of it like bricks and mortar. This would be an example. Somebody stands up and they're like, I did all of these things, look at my accomplishments, read my bio. But what you don't hear is about all the mortar between all of those historic moments of held together, the small conversations, the talking together. And what makes that richer is if you do that together, older and younger partners together, different, uniquely walking through these transitions, which are not change by choice, they're an evolution.
Amen. Amen. Since we have Scott up here, I want to open it up what questions are you thinking about? We only have a couple. I see Dex back here. So because you are a brave soul, hop on up and share with us your question. If you have a question, I think we're going to have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions or so. We have about 12 minutes left, and then I'll get the final question. But Dex, what are you wondering about? Thanks
Hey,
for being
Scott.
here.
Thank you so much for your wisdom. I mean, you talk about elders and people that are leading the way and making an example. I mean, you are a prime example of that. So firstly, thank you for all your wisdom that you're dropping on us today. You talked a little bit about the fundamentals of being. I would love to know what the hardest fundamental was for you to learn, and then how can we translate that into our work?
Yeah. Well, Max did a really good job of creating a space to belong and to be vulnerable. And vulnerability builds trust. And it's part of what happens when you share. Other people feel good to share. This is a fundamental, although at first it's not going to sound like it. But I grew up with a label I gladly accept, but I was bestowed the honor of dyslexia, along with a whole bunch of other Ds, like dysgraphia. I don't know. It was like later I got diabetes. I don't know. It seems to be a thing in Ds. I got a D in algebra once. Still graduated with honors. I was like, proudest grade I got, actually. I was like, cheapers. I'm glad I made it. But anyway, dyslexia. And I just bring this up because at the time, I really felt all the way up until my middle 30s that basically when I was told that, kids with a bright future went down the normal hallway, and I needed to go left to a lesser existence. And the fundamental that I think we all suffer with, most of us if we're honest, is to just trust that you've got something to offer and that other people are interested. Max said it was hard to get me on stage. It always is, and I appreciate it. And that's a confession. That's the hardest fundamentals that I've personally struggled with, is to be able to just accept the goodness in oneself and that other people want to participate in that goodness as well.
Well, as somebody who has gotten a lot more Scott time than what a lot of other people get, I love getting to just have conversations with you and spar with you. And so know that I was going to make a hallway reference, but in real time, it sounded much more sexual than I wanted it to. So I'm not going to make the coming down my hallway reference, but we have to. I'll choose you in the hallway.
I don't know if it makes it better or worse. Because now everybody, it's like the collective imaginations of hundreds of people were just like, write it all down and then trade with each other at break. What did you think Max was going to say?
Oh, I don't think anybody needs that or wants it. Has anybody looked up the wombat thing yet? Oh my God. Okay, great. That's great. We have one more question, and it looks like we have somebody in the back. I think we're right over here, Chris. Why don't you meet Chris halfway? There you go. Perfect.
Good afternoon. Yeah, so thank you both. I think there's a common thread that I kind of want to explore with both of you, that I think in today's day and age, that I really appreciate what you said with the lack of an elder kind of amidst the community element. I think with the introduction of social media, everybody is trying to be that person, right? Everybody's trying to step into the role. They're trying to be the professional, the elder, the informant, the person who knows everything. And it can be tough, right? Entering into the nonprofits, into the business world, and into these things, and trying to put yourself in a position where, how do I show up and how do I care about these people? I would just kind of ask you guys, putting aside all the sales and everything, how do you guys show up for community, right? And what sets you apart when you're talking about it? And I don't even know if that makes sense. I know I'm kind of word vomiting, but how do we build that community again, right? How do you separate the people who are just there kind of throwing a bunch of social media posts at the wall, seeing what sticks and what's actually truly there for the community?
I think it's part of the reason that we created this, right? We wanted to create a space where people could gather and have these kind of organic collisions. Earlier this year, I met for the very first time Terry Brandt, and it was fascinating. We love Terry Brandt. Thanks for being here. But one of the things that I found so fascinating was we had these perfectly parallel ideas that were just like, we need to create space where people don't have to feel so alone. Because in this crazy world, I think we're feeling more and more alone, and the devices in our hands, I think, just push that even further. And then there's this expectation that if I'm not an influencer, then I'm like not enough, or I'm not worthy enough, or I'm not X, Y, and Z, whatever your enough is. And so I think one of the ways that we start building community, rebuilding community, is just by starting to have some conversations again. I think so often we are having conversations to figure out what is my response going to be, instead of really understanding what is it that you're sharing with me, so that way I can lift this up as well. One of my new favorite authors, Allison Woods Brooks, has this framework called the TALK framework. And what she is trying to do, she's a Harvard researcher, and she's been studying this for a long time. Anybody who's come in my orbit in the last 6 months has heard me nerd out about this a little bit. But it's just this idea that conversations are actually fairly simple. And all conversations really are a series of stories strung along together. 30-second version of the framework is T stands for topics. What are the things that we're going to talk about? A is for asking questions. Asking genuine questions to build on those topics, to build on the things that I'm inviting you into. L is for levity. How do we have some fun in the conversations that we have again? Part of a great conversation is enjoying just being around the people that you're with. And K is for kindness. Go into that conversation not expecting anything back. And I think this can be really hard as small business owners. This can be hard as fundraisers, as executive directors. You're like, I have to get to my ask because that is my job. But I think that there is something so magical about going in, having real conversations with real people to understand what it is that they care about. As Scott mentioned, if we have 2 planets together, think about all of the incredible things that we can do just by learning other folks' stories. And so how do we rebuild community? My answer is, and this is very much drinking my own Kool-Aid, have conversations, share more stories. And I think that's how we rebuild community. Scott?
Yeah, so if taking a shot, I think I heard three possible questions, which is, what about eldership? What about authenticity screening? And what about community? And so taking all 3 of those, eldership is one of those things that I think is named by other people, not by yourself. So this actually explains the second bullet. So if somebody's come to my elder channel, where I'll give you the advice of the world, this is part of the authenticity screening, is that we need to pay attention to what it is that we're consuming, and we're evolving. Phones are new. Social media are still new. You know, we've already changed how, in my neighborhood, we have a pact that no kids are getting phones, maybe ever, but for sure not until 9th grade. And we're doing it together. And it's go ahead and complain, because they're all going to complain. But that's new. That's an evolution. You could look at that like curmudgeons, and we could talk about how technology is destroying the world, or we could also say we're just trying to figure out how to use something powerful that's come into our life, like AI. We're going to evolve. We're going to figure it out. We can trust that we will find our way through this, like we have every other thing that has happened, from TV to cars to seatbelts, etc. We will find our way. And so the role of elders is, I do think there's an invitation that needs to be done by us to others, is to invite people of certain ages and experiences. And sometimes eldership and maturity doesn't have to do with an age and, an old soul, if you will. But your job is to invite them to the table and to ask questions. And then the trust is reciprocal. And so there's not a bunch of wise people that are, walking around just waiting to yell at you on the street to shake up your life, but they actually are all there. if you spent time to invite them. And I think that may answer a little bit about eldership, a little bit about how you create community, and a little bit about authenticity screening. And I mentioned the two great Carls. The other great Carl, instead of Carl Rogers, was Carl Jung. And Carl Jung has this great term called life task. We try to define our purpose. And this is kind of like a metaphor for we try to do too much, be too much, do everything. That's like purpose. It's what's my purpose? And it's good luck. There's some great frameworks for that. But a life task is what's important right now. If you really had to pick, which is building off of what Noah shared, we have a life task. And sometimes that's my focus is my kid, or there's a health change. About every 18 months, researchers predict that you're going to go through a life quake. Midlife crisis is actually a misnomer. It's about every 18 months. And that means a friend is going to go through a health crisis. You're going to go through one. There's going to be a job change. There's going to be a relationship change. About every 18 months, those life quakes are coming. And again, those can be a change or those can be evolution, and that is a choice that you make. And the more we make those types of choices and the better we get at defining our life task and helping other people to do so, we're going to create more community, we're going to invite more eldership, and we're going to find ourselves on a path to healing that we're all craving.
Amen. Scott, we are getting a blinking red light, which means that our time on the podcast is done. But thanks for joining us for our very first live episode of Tell All the Podcast. Thanks, Todd. Appreciate you.
Love you.
Thanks for spending some time with us today. I hope this conversation gave you something useful to take back to your work. If you're looking for more resources on storytelling, strategy, and building communications that actually move people to action, head on over to WeTellWell.com. We've got guides, case stories, and plenty of ways to dig deeper. And if you're at a point where you're ready to get serious about clarifying your message or telling your story in a bigger way, let's talk. You can book a planning call with our team right on the website. We'd love to hear what you're working on. One last thing. If this episode was helpful, share it with someone on your team or leave us a review. It really does help other mission-driven folks find the show. I'm Max Kringen. Thanks for listening to Tell Well the Podcast. Now go tell your story well, because a well-told story can move your mission forward and change the world.